People often ask me whether I believe in ghosts. For years I answered that question with the confidence of a man who had spent his life caring for the elderly. I had watched people speak to husbands who had died decades before. I had seen women smile at empty chairs convinced their children had just walked into the room. Dementia, loneliness, grief. They could create entire worlds more convincing than reality itself. I believed every haunting could be explained. Until I met Eleanor Whitmore, and until I spent 3 nights inside Willow House. Even now, 15 years later, I cannot drive through the Yorkshire countryside in winter without looking toward the old oak forest where the house still stands. People say it has been abandoned for years. They are wrong. Someone is always waiting inside. I accepted the job because I had no choice. At 28, pride becomes an expensive luxury. The nursing home where I had worked for 6 years had closed after financial troubles, leaving dozens of us unemployed just before Christmas. My savings disappeared quickly beneath rent, electricity bills, and the hospital expenses for my mother, who had been fighting cancer for almost a year. Every interview ended the same way. "We'll call you." No one ever did. Then an agency phoned me with a peculiar offer. Private caregiver. Night shifts only. Excellent pay. Immediate start. "There is one condition," the woman on the phone said. What condition? She hesitated long enough for static to fill the silence. The previous caregivers rarely stayed. Why? We're not entirely sure. I almost laughed. Does the client bite? No. Violence? No. Then what's the problem? Another pause. They leave. That's all. They leave before the 3rd night. I accept it before she could change her mind. The taxi driver refused to take me all the way to the front gate. He stopped nearly half a mile from the property, pointing through the falling snow. "You see those lights?" Between the bare branches, I could just make out the faint glow of warm windows. "That's Willow House." "Why stop here?" He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I don't drive closer after dark." I smiled politely. "You believe the stories." He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "I buried my brother 12 years ago. I waited. He delivered coal there every Thursday. What happened? He quit. That doesn't sound frightening. He quit because he said someone thanked him every week. So my brother was deaf. The driver accepted his fare without another word. When I stepped into the snow, he drove away much faster than necessary. His taillights disappeared around the bend within seconds, leaving me alone. The path leading to Willow House curved through ancient oak trees, whose branches reached over the road like skeletal fingers. Snow muffled every sound. No birds, no wind, only my own footsteps. Then the house appeared. It was magnificent. A Victorian manor built from dark stone, its steep roof crowned with weathered chimneys. Ivy clung stubbornly to one side despite the winter frost. Tall windows reflected the moonlight like watchful eyes. One window on the 2nd floor remained brightly lit. For reasons I couldn't explain, it immediately drew my attention. Someone was awake, watching. Before I could convince myself otherwise, the front door opened. An elderly woman stood there. She wore a dark blue dress beneath a thick knitted cardigan. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head, and despite her age, she stood with remarkable dignity. "You must be Daniel." Her smile carried a quiet kindness. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore." Her handshake was warm, far warmer than mine. The house smelled of lavender. Not old age, not dust, lavender. Every room looked perfectly maintained, furniture polished, books neatly arranged. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases despite the frozen world outside. Nothing matched the abandoned reputation I'd imagined. Until we entered the dining room. 2 places had been set for dinner. 2 china plates, 2 wine glasses, 2 folded napkins. The meal itself sat covered beneath silver lids. Eleanor noticed me staring. My husband dislikes cold food. I glanced around. I didn't realize someone else lived here. He'll be home soon. Her answer came so naturally that I simply nodded. Only later did I notice the framed photograph above the fireplace. A handsome gentleman in military uniform smiled proudly beside a much younger Eleanor. A black ribbon had been tied discreetly around the frame. The date beneath the photograph read 1942, 2011. After dinner, Eleanor showed me the house. "There are only a few rules." Her voice remained gentle, almost apologetic. "Please don't lock the front door after 10. All right. If you hear the piano upstairs, she paused. Don't interrupt. I understand. If someone walks through the hallway at night, she smiled faintly. Let them. I thought perhaps she meant sleepwalking. Then she added one final rule. If the bell rings at midnight, her expression became unexpectedly serious. Please answer it. I frowned. Even if nobody is expected. Especially then. Around 11:30, Eleanor retired to her bedroom. I sleep lightly, she said. If Arthur comes home before morning, wake me. Arthur, her husband, dead for 15 years. I reminded myself that Alzheimer's often blurred time. Correcting patients usually caused unnecessary distress. I wished her good night. The grandfather clock struck midnight. 1, 2, 3. 12 slow chimes echoed through the entrance hall. The final note had barely faded when the doorbell rang. Its sound was clear, deep, old-fashioned. I walked toward the entrance. No fear, only curiosity. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the porch light. No visitor, no footsteps, no carriage, no car, nothing. The untouched blanket of snow stretched all the way to the iron gate. Not a single footprint disturbed its surface. I stood there for nearly a minute before closing the door. As I turned, the second teacup on the small table beside the fireplace released a thin ribbon of steam. 5 minutes earlier, both cups had been cold. Now one was warm enough to fog the air above it. I reached out. The porcelain burned my fingertips. Someone had just poured boiling tea, but I had never left the hallway. At 1 o'clock, the rocking chair beside the fireplace began moving. Slowly, forward, back, forward, back. No breeze, no open window, only the soft creaking of old wood. I stopped it with one hand. It remained perfectly still, until I turned away. Behind me, creak, forward, back, forward, back. I chose not to look again. At exactly 2 in the morning, music drifted down from the second floor. A piano. The melody was gentle, melancholy. A Christmas carol I remembered hearing as a child. Its notes echoed softly through the empty corridors, each one carrying a sadness that seemed far older than the house itself. I remembered Eleanor's warning. Don't interrupt. I lasted less than a minute. Professional curiosity defeated common sense. Taking only a flashlight, I climbed the grand staircase. Each step groaned beneath my weight. The music grew clearer. Someone was playing beautifully. Not perfectly. Beautifully. Like someone remembering rather than performing. The sound led me to a room at the end of the western corridor. The door stood slightly open. Golden light spilled through the narrow gap. My heart pounded. I pushed the door wider. Inside stood an antique grand piano. Its polished black surface reflected the moonlight. The keys were moving. One after another. White, black, white, black. Pressed by invisible fingers. No one sat on the piano bench. The melody continued. Slow, tender, heartbreaking. My breath caught. The final note lingered in the silent room. Then every key stopped. I stepped closer. Dust covered the instrument so thickly that no one could have played it for years. Yet across that untouched layer of dust, something slowly appeared. Not written quickly, not scratched. Written, as though an unseen fingertip moved gently through the gray powder. Letter by letter. She's forgetting me. I stared, unable to breathe. A cold breeze brushed the back of my neck. Then a man's voice whispered only inches behind my ear. So quietly that it sounded more like a memory than a sound. Please. A pause. Don't let her forget. I spun around. The room was empty, but the piano began playing again. This time, only a single note. Over and over and over. The single piano note continued long after my courage had left me. It sounded again and again. In the empty room, each strike soft but deliberate, as though whoever pressed the key wanted to make certain I understood that I was no longer alone. I stood frozen beside the piano, staring at the words written in the dust. She's forgetting me. Behind me, the corridor remained dark. The man's voice had vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving only the cold pressure of his presence in the room. I told myself I had imagined it. Fatigue, stress, grief, and an old house full of strange noises could do cruel things to the mind. But then the piano played another note, lower this time. deeper, like a warning. I backed away from the instrument, nearly knocking over the bench. The dust on its black surface shivered, though no wind entered the room. For one terrible moment, I thought another message might appear, but instead the note stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I hurried out, closed the door behind me, and made my way back down the staircase with one hand gripping the railing. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch me descend. Men in old uniforms, women in high collars, children who had been dead for generations. Their painted eyes followed me until I reached the entrance hall. The second teacup beside the fireplace was still steaming. I did not touch it again. By morning, I had convinced myself that I would leave. Then I saw Eleanor. She was sitting by the window in the breakfast room, wearing a pale gray dress with a pearl brooch pinned neatly at her throat. Snowlight softened the wrinkles on her face, and for a moment she looked less like an elderly woman than a girl who had simply waited too long. "Good morning, Daniel," she said. Her voice was clear, not confused, not frightened, just gentle. "Did Arthur come home last night?" I almost told her the truth. That the bell had rung, that tea had warmed itself, that a piano had played in an empty room, that a dead man had whispered behind me. Instead, I said, "I don't know." Eleanor smiled sadly. He is quiet when he doesn't want to worry me. That answer unsettled me more than any scream could have. After breakfast, I phoned the agency from the kitchen while Eleanor watered the herbs on the windowsill. A woman named Margaret answered. "I need to know more about Mrs. Whitmore's condition," I said. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "She believes her husband is still alive. That was mentioned in the notes." "No," I said quietly. "She believes he comes home every night." Another pause. "Mr. Whitmore died 15 years ago." "I know." "Then treat it as memory confusion. Don't argue. Don't distress her." "What about the piano room?" The line went silent. "What piano room?" "The one upstairs." Her voice changed. Just slightly. "Mr. Harper, the upstairs west room is usually kept locked." It wasn't. "Then lock it." "Why, because Mrs. Whitmore becomes distressed when people go in there." I looked across the kitchen. Eleanor was trimming a rosemary plant with tiny silver scissors. Her hands moved carefully, peacefully. "What happened to Arthur?" I asked. Margaret exhaled. "You should speak to the solicitor if you need family history. I'm the caregiver inside her house. I think I have a right to know." For a few seconds, only static answered me. Then Margaret said, "There was a storm. When December, years ago." "What kind of storm?" "A snowstorm. Arthur Whitmore left the house during the night to fetch a doctor for Eleanor. She had collapsed. The phones were down. Roads were blocked. I waited. He never came back. They found him near the old bridge the next morning." My eyes moved toward the window beyond the garden, toward the white woods. "He died trying to save her." "Yes." Margaret's voice softened. "Mrs. Whitmore survived. But after that, she began setting the table for two, every night. At first, people thought it was grief. Later, when her memory declined, the habit became part of her illness. And the doorbell, what about it? She told me to answer it at midnight." Margaret did not reply. "Has anyone else reported that her silence told me everything?" "Mr. Harper," she said, "at last you are being paid very well because this placement is difficult. If you feel unsafe, you may leave." The sensible part of me wanted to say yes. I wanted to pack my bag, walk through the snow, and never look back at Willow House. But then I remembered my mother's hospital bills. I remembered the empty flat waiting for me. And I remembered the voice behind me. "Please, don't let her forget." "I'll stay another night," I said. I regretted the words before the call ended. That afternoon, Eleanor became more confused. She asked me 3 times whether I had polished Arthur's shoes. She folded and refolded the same handkerchief for nearly an hour. At 4 o'clock, she stood in the hallway, staring up the staircase. "Arthur dislikes guests going into his music room," she said. I lowered the tray I was carrying. "I'm sorry." She turned slowly. "For what? For going in last night?" Her face changed. Something passed through her eyes. Fear. Recognition. Then it was gone. "You mustn't listen when he plays." Sadly, she whispered. "Why?" "Because then he remembers the cold." I stepped closer. "Eleanor, do you know Arthur is dead?" The moment I asked, I knew it was a mistake. Her lips trembled. "He promised he would always come home." "I know." "No," she said, and suddenly there was strength in her voice. "You don't know. Young people think promises end when breathing does." She turned away, leaving me with the tray in my hands and a chill beneath my skin. That evening I found a box of letters in the library. I had not meant to pry. At least that is what I told myself. But the library door had been ajar, and inside a stack of old correspondence sat on the writing desk beside a brass lamp. The top envelope was addressed to Eleanor in a firm, elegant hand. My dearest Nell. I should not have opened it, but I did. Arthur's letters were not dramatic. They were tender in the quiet way Englishmen of his generation often were. He wrote about rain on the roof, the garden wall needing repair, the sound Eleanor made when she tried not to laugh in church. He wrote about ordinary things as if they were treasures. One sentence appeared again and again. As long as you remember me, I will always come home. I found the last letter beneath the others. It was dated 2 days before the storm. My dearest Nell, if winter should ever take me before old age does, do not sit too long in sadness. Light the fire, make the tea, play the carols badly if you must. I shall find my way by the sound of you laughing. I stopped reading. The words blurred. For the first time, I began to understand that Willow House was not haunted by death. It was haunted by devotion. At 10 o'clock, I did not lock the front door. At 11, Eleanor asked me whether Arthur's cup was clean. I said yes. At 11:30, the rocking chair began moving again. This time I did not stop it. At midnight, the doorbell rang. I stood in the hall with my hand on the latch. Outside, the snow was falling harder than the night before. The world beyond the porch was white and empty. I opened the door. No one stood there. But this time there were footprints. One set, a man's boots. They began at the gate, crossed the snow-covered path, and stopped at the threshold. They did not turn back. Behind me, Eleanor gasped. I turned. She stood at the foot of the staircase in her nightgown, one hand pressed to her chest. Arthur. The house became impossibly still. Then from somewhere above us, the piano began to play. Not the lonely single note from the previous night. A carol. Soft, familiar, broken in places. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. He's home, she whispered. I wanted to tell her to stay downstairs, but she was already moving toward the staircase. I followed close behind, afraid she might fall. With every step, the music grew warmer, less like a haunting and more like a memory returning to a room that had waited faithfully for it. The door to the music room stood open. Inside, the piano keys moved by themselves. Eleanor entered without fear. Arthur, she said. The music stopped. The dust on the piano surface stirred. Words appeared slowly. Not for me this time. For her. Do you remember our song? Eleanor stared at the message. Her face emptied. Then she frowned like a child trying to solve a lesson. Our song. The air turned cold. The lamp flickered. The words in the dust trembled as if written by a hand that had suddenly begun to shake. Eleanor took one step back. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know. The room seemed to exhale. The piano slammed shut. Every candle in the room went out at once. Eleanor cried out and collapsed against me. In the darkness, a man's voice whispered from the far corner. She is almost gone. I held Eleanor upright, my heart hammering. Who are you? I asked. A pale shape appeared near the window. Not clear, not solid. Only the outline of a man in an old dark coat, his face hidden by shadow and snowlight. He looked at Eleanor with such sorrow that I felt ashamed for being afraid. Then he turned his head toward me. She must remember before the final night, he whispered. What happens then? The figure faded, but his answer remained in the freezing air. If she forgets me completely, I cannot come home again. The words stayed in the air long after Arthur's figure disappeared. If she forgets me completely, I cannot come home again. I stood in the dark music room with Eleanor trembling against me, the smell of old dust and winter roses pressing around us. The piano had fallen silent. The candles were out. The only light came from the moon beyond the tall window, spreading across the floor like a sheet over a body. Eleanor's fingers clutched my sleeve. Daniel, she whispered. Why am I upstairs? Her voice was small now, frightened. I helped her sit on the piano bench, though my own legs felt unsteady. She looked around the room with the puzzled fear of someone waking inside a dream she did not remember entering. This was his room, she said. Arthur, she nodded slowly. He played when he was happy. Badly most of the time. A faint smile touched her lips. He always said music should be forgiven if it was honest. I looked at the closed piano. Do you remember your song? The smile faded. Our song I waited, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Eleanor looked at the piano, then at the window where snow tapped softly against the glass. There was a song, she murmured. At Christmas. Which one? Her brow tightened. I don't know. The room grew colder. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 3. Eleanor began to cry, not loudly, not desperately, but in the quiet way the very old sometimes cry, as if apologizing for taking up space with their sorrow. I'm losing him, she said. Aren't I? I did not answer, because the truth would have been too cruel. The next day, the storm worsened. Snow buried the garden paths. The old bridge beyond the woods disappeared beneath white mist. The telephone line went dead before noon, and by evening, the house felt completely cut off from the living world. Eleanor drifted in and out of memory. At breakfast, she called me Arthur. At lunch, she asked whether her mother would be joining us. By afternoon, she stared at her wedding ring as if she could not understand why it was on her hand. I searched the house for anything that might help her remember. Photographs, letters, music sheets, old Christmas cards. In the library, I found a leather album tied with a ribbon. Inside were photographs of a younger Eleanor and Arthur through the decades. Arthur in uniform. Arthur beside a newly planted rose bush. Arthur holding an umbrella over Eleanor while she laughed in the rain. Arthur sitting at the piano, one hand lifted dramatically as if accepting applause. On the final page was a photograph of the two of them outside Willow house on Christmas Eve. Eleanor was young and bright-eyed. Arthur stood beside her, his coat dusted with snow. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Our first Christmas at Willow House." He played the holly and the ivy terribly. I loved him for it. I held the photograph for a long time. The holly and the ivy. Their song. That evening I brought the album to Eleanor. She sat by the fire, a blanket over her knees, staring at the second cup of tea on the table. "Eleanor," I said gently, "I found something." She looked at me without recognition. "Are you the doctor?" "No. I'm Daniel." "Oh." Her eyes moved away. I knelt beside her chair and opened the album. "This is Arthur." For a moment, nothing happened. Then her hand lifted. Her fingers touched the photograph of the young man at the piano. "He was handsome," she whispered. "Yes." Did I know him? The question struck me harder than I expected. I swallowed. "You loved him." She looked at the image for a long time, then shook her head. "I'm sorry." The fire snapped loudly. The second teacup cracked from rim to base. A thin line of tea spilled across the saucer like blood. Eleanor did not notice, but I did, and from somewhere upstairs came a single piano note, low, broken, grieving. At midnight, the doorbell rang again. This time I opened it before the final echo faded. The snow outside was wild, driven sideways by the wind. The porch lantern swung violently. At first I saw nothing, then I looked down. Footprints. Again. Arthur's footprints crossed the path deeper than before, as if the man who had made them had walked a very long way through the storm. They ended at the threshold. I stepped aside. "Come in," I whispered. The house answered with warmth. The fire in the drawing room flared high. The scent of lavender grew stronger. Somewhere upstairs, a piano began to play. Not clearly, not confidently, but as if invisible hands were searching for a melody they feared had been lost. The holly and the ivy. I ran to Eleanor's room. She was awake, sitting upright in bed. Tears streaked her face. "I heard him," she said. "Then come with me." I wrapped her in a shawl and helped her down the hallway. Each step took effort. Her breathing was shallow. Her hand felt as thin as paper in mine. When we reached the music room, the door stood open. Candles burned on every surface. The piano played softly by itself. On top of it lay the photograph from the album, the one of their first Christmas at Willow House. Eleanor stared at it. The melody continued. Her lips parted. Then, in a voice barely louder than the storm, she whispered, "The holly and the ivy." The music stopped. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor took one step into the room. Arthur. The air near the piano shimmered. Slowly, the outline of a man appeared. Not fully solid, not alive, but present. He stood in his old dark coat, snow clinging to his shoulders. His face was pale, gentle, and filled with a love so patient it made my heart ache. Eleanor looked at him. For one terrible second, I thought she did not know him. Then her face changed. Years fell away from her eyes. "Arthur," she breathed. He smiled. My Nell. She began to cry. You came home. I promised. She lifted a trembling hand toward him. You were gone so long. I came every night. I forgot. I know. I didn't mean to. I know that too. Her body shook with sobs. Arthur looked at her with no anger at all. Only sorrow. Only tenderness. I was afraid, he said, that one day I would knock and there would be no one left inside who knew why I had come. Eleanor pressed both hands to her mouth. I remember now. Arthur's image flickered. The candle flames bent toward him. You remember the song, yes. The tea, yes. The bridge. Her face tightened. I saw the memory return like a wound reopening. The storm. Her illness. Arthur leaving in the snow to fetch help. The promise. The waiting. The body found near the bridge. Oh, Arthur, she whispered. You died because of me. He stepped closer. No. You went out for me. I went out because I loved you. You never came back. His smile was sad. I tried. The windows rattled. For a moment, I saw another world layered over the room. Arthur stumbling through snow, one hand pressed to his chest, the wind tearing at his coat, Willow house glowing behind him like a promise he could not reach. Then it vanished. Eleanor seemed to see it too. Her knees weakened. I caught her before she fell. Arthur's eyes moved to me. Bring her downstairs, he said softly. By the fire. I obeyed. I helped Eleanor down the staircase, one slow step at a time. The whole house had changed. It no longer felt haunted. It felt awake. Warm lamps burned in rooms I had not entered. The smell of tea filled the hall. The rocking chair moved gently beside the fireplace, not in warning now, but in welcome. I settled Eleanor into her chair. On the table beside her were 2 fresh cups of tea. Steam rose from both. Arthur appeared across from her, seated where the second cup waited. For a while, neither spoke. They only looked at each other. 2 people separated by death, held together by a promise stronger than time. Eleanor reached for her cup. Her hands shook too badly. I helped her lift it. She smiled faintly. Too much milk, she said. Arthur laughed. It was the first time I heard the house sound happy. I always made it that way, he said. I always complained, and drank it anyway. Yes. Her eyes softened. I loved you terribly. I know. I waited for you. I know. Were you lonely? Arthur looked around the room. At times. I'm sorry. He leaned forward. Do not spend your last moments apologizing for being loved. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her breathing had grown weaker. I understood then. This was not only Arthur's final night. It was hers. The agency had not told me everything, but perhaps they had not known. Eleanor had been fading for months. Her memory, her body, her strength, all of it had been slipping away. Arthur had not come to frighten her. He had come to take her home. The clock struck 1. Eleanor opened her eyes again. Daniel, I'm here. Thank you. I shook my head. I didn't do anything. You listened. Arthur looked at me then and nodded once. Somehow that felt like forgiveness for every fear I had carried in that house. Eleanor turned back to him. Will it hurt? No, Arthur said. Will I remember? He reached across the table. This time when she placed her hand in his, their fingers touched. Truly touched. You will remember everything, he said. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. Then play for me. Arthur smiled. From upstairs the piano began to play. The Holly and the Ivy. Not badly this time. Beautifully. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her hands still reaching toward him. Her face became peaceful. Young, almost. She took one final breath as the last note floated through Willow house. Then she was still. The fire burned bright. Arthur stood. For a moment I saw Eleanor beside him. Not old, not fragile, not confused. She wore the blue dress from the photograph, her silver hair restored to dark waves, her eyes shining with the same laughter that had once filled every room. She looked at me. Tell them I was not alone, she said. Then Arthur offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked toward the front door. It opened without a sound. Beyond it, there was no storm, only a soft golden light falling over fresh snow. They stepped into it, and Willow house was quiet. The official report said Eleanor Whitmore died peacefully. In her sleep. I did not correct it. No one would have believed the truth. When Margaret from the agency arrived the next morning, she found me sitting in the drawing room beside 2 empty cups of tea. She looked at them for a long time. Then she asked, "Did he come?" I nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Good," she whispered. "I never worked as a private caregiver again. Some houses ask too much of the living. But every winter when snow begins to fall, I remember Willow House. I remember the piano, the footsteps, the steaming tea, and the old woman who forgot everything except how deeply she had been loved." Years later, I drove past the property one Christmas Eve. The gates were locked, the windows dark, the house empty according to everyone in town. But as I slowed near the old road, I saw one light burning in the music room. And through the snow, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a piano playing a Christmas carol badly. Then a woman laughed, and a man laughed with her. That was when I finally understood. Willow House had never been a place where ghosts were trapped. It was a place where love kept finding its way home.